Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, May 7th. One of my colleagues shared that they have decided to do a Bible study on Lamentations. This seems like an appropriate time to discuss Lamentations. Among other things, Lamentations is a book of grief. And I imagine that in some way, all of us are grieving right now. We are grieving school years that have ended abruptly, friends who we cannot say goodbye to, who we cannot see and touch. We are grieving family members that now seem distant. We are grieving a life that in reflection seemed carefree. We are grieving, worrying about paychecks, worrying about safety. We are grieving many things. What are you grieving? We are grieving, I am grieving, some of the things of the way my life used to be. I used to love to get together with friends, sit around a table, have a meal, play a board game. And while that might happen again at some point in the future, until there are changes, either in contact tracing or in treatment or in vaccines or some combination of this, until there are changes, that part of my life is on pause, and I grieve it. Lamentations is a book of grief. It is 5 chapters long. Each of the chapters we divide in some way into 22 verses, and that's because Lamentations is an acrostic. In the first chapter, every word in the various sections will begin with a certain Hebrew letter. It is a way to teach your Aleph, Beits, and Gimels. And I never took Hebrew, so if I'm saying those Hebrew letters incorrectly, what I'm meaning to say is it's a way to learn your ABCs in Hebrew. For me, the opening of the book resonates with the current crisis and is also evocative words. Alas, how lonely sits the city that once was thronged with people. How like a widow she has become. She that was great among the nations, she that was a princess among the provinces, has become a vassal. She weeps bitterly in the night with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become enemies. Judah has gone into exile with suffering and hard servitude. She lives now among the nations and finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. How many of you have seen pictures of cities that normally are thronged with traffic where the streets are nearly empty? How many of you have seen videos of dolphins in the canals of Venice or deer going through the streets of a city? Alas, how lonely sits the city. These are places where we are used to activity, noise, vibrancy, life, constant moving about, chaos. And there is stillness, and there is quiet. And we are not used to stillness and quiet. Cities are places. Our most recent trip to the city, before all this started, we took Mary to the zoo. We met some friends and went for lunch in a brewery. We went to a park. We had these experiences. Cities are places where we are used to their being. And now they are quiet. You can almost hear a pin drop, or so I'm told. I live in Albany. I have not been to a city. Jerusalem, a place of vibrance and life, was quiet. Quiet after the Babylonian army came in, slaughtered thousands, took thousands more into captivity. Alas, how lonely sits the city. The author of this book is lamenting what has come before. The author of this book pictures and personifies Jerusalem/Zion as a woman, and does not claim that this woman is innocent, does not claim that Jerusalem has not made mistakes, but cries implicitly that what has happened has been too much. Verses 14 of chapter 1, for instance. My transgressions were bound into a yoke by his hand. They were fastened together. They weigh on my neck, sapping my strength. The Lord handed me over to those whom I cannot withstand. The Lord has rejected me, all my warriors in the midst of me. He proclaimed the time against me to crush my young men. The Lord has trodden as in a winepress, the virgin daughter Judah. For these things I weep. My eyes flow with tears, for a comforter is far from me, one to revive my courage. My children are desolate, for the enemy has prevailed. The opening chapter of Lamentations is a mourning and a weeping for what has been. It is unfair of us to dismiss it, just as it is unfair of us to dismiss our grief. If you are grieving right now, sometimes it can be cathartic to say, you know what? This stinks. Sometimes it can be cathartic to say, I don't like this. It can be helpful to acknowledge that you are sad, that while you might be physically healthy, that you are feeling lonely, that you don't like the way things are. We can grieve what we had and didn't realize we had. We can grieve for the way things were, for we know that when we do come back together, though it will be a joyous time with blessings rich and manifold, that it will be different because we can never truly go back. Just as the exiles returning to Babylon, and you can read about them in Isaiah chapter 40, just about as the exiles returning to Babylon found it not quite as they remembered. They found that some changes were permanent. We too that will find that when we can come back, whether that be next month or next year, that there will be some things that we cannot go back to. But we will discover in our grief the God who grieves with us, God who says, I am here with you. I am beside me. What are you grieving? What are you crying out to God? In what way are you crying for your Lord? In what way do you need God to hear you? What on this day are you lamenting? Amen.